Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is July 31st today, and I'm going to take a look at the astrology of August. I'm just returning from a little trip to San Francisco where I spent time with some of my spiritual community and one of my spiritual teachers. And it was really renewing after a pretty difficult eclipse season. I don't know how it was for all of you, but definitely had a challenging one. So I'm getting caught up now with a lot of things from that little break. So for those of you who are waiting for my sun and rising sign horoscopes, they will be out over the course of the next few days. A little behind schedule this month, but they should be out to give you full info about your sun or rising sign for August. Today, what I'm doing is just making a quick overview of the month on a mundane level. Mundane meaning what are the forecasts that everyone's experiencing and what are some general interpretations that we might all benefit from. So the transits really get started today. It's kind of a cuspy day in terms of the astrology of August. It really sort of gets started on the 31st. So you can see this. I'm going to put the chart up on the screen. And you can see this because we have a new moon taking place in the sign of Leo today on the 31st, coming through here right at the end of the day on the East Coast here in the United States. And we have, at the same time that that is happening, we have Venus moving into a square with the planet Uranus. Let me plug in the outer planets here so that we can see them. So here you're going to see the sun is just separating from a square to Uranus, and Venus is moving into a square with Uranus. So there's some really nice sort of Uranian energy in the air today. It's got a nice reception with Venus right now, Uranus being in Taurus, which is Venus's sign, and that's really toning the lunar cycle for the month ahead. So what can you think about as some of the major themes for August? Well, one of the things that comes up with Venus square Uranus has a lot to do with the themes of freedom and the need for greater autonomy within relationships, the need for greater status or recognition, and innovative new ways of defining ourselves or setting ourselves apart. That's a combination of Venus and the sun in Leo, a sign that is concerned with reputation, authority, how we stand out and express ourselves in the world, but also plugging right into the concerns of Uranus, which have a lot to do with independence, freedom, defying norms and limitations, inventiveness. So how can we set ourselves apart? How can we obtain more freedom? How can we define ourselves more uniquely? These are questions for the month of August. The new moon plants that seed, as every moon cycle does, and this one is in direct contact with Uranus. Now, Venus and Uranus contacts can also be really sort of strange and experimental. The new style, the new fashion, the new, the aesthetic surgery, to be a little bit careful of sort of like a Frankenstein vibe with Venus, Uranus, or almost like the zombie vibe, where something that has been altered in a way that ends up making it look sort of creepy and scary. And it's like, is it alive? Is it dead? So this idea of sort of reanimating something or trying to tweak or modify something. We have that a bit in the air right now as well, specifically because Uranus likes to do things that are new, but also sometimes sort of disturbing and eccentric. So you want to be careful of going to extremes. It's not a great time in some ways to strike out with a brand new style or to try something that's really daring, even though you might be compelled to. You may not get the social reaction that you're hoping for. Do you know what I mean? So that's something to just be aware of. The other thing that you can think about for this month ahead is breaking out of anything that's confining or limiting. You also want to be careful of the reactions of the ego, having, your pride sort of wounded or injured and lashing out, or I won't do this, or I'm not going to do anything, or just, making yourself awkward, but putting yourself in an awkward position socially because you're feeling defiant or your ego is feeling unappreciated or unrespected or unnoticed or something like that. It's possible to burn a few bridges right now with Venus Uranus. So you want to be careful about those things. Venus Uranus is also potentially about things like activism in women or progressive and rebelliousness, progressive causes and sort of rebellious attitudes around tradition or convention or authority, and specifically related to women or to sexuality, the sort of Venus Uranus things. So those are some things to think about with this new moon, which is really sort of toning things to start with. Then what happens, which is happening tomorrow, if that's, a powerful way to start the month, right? Tomorrow on August 1st, you're going to see Mercury turn direct. Now, that's pretty powerful because Mercury has been retrograde for a little bit. It's backed into Cancer now. So as it turns direct, especially around, emotional dynamics, family dynamics, situations related to your home or your property or anything that's really lunar in nature, family, home, property, more emotional, vulnerable dynamics in your life with other people. If there have been stalls, breakdowns, waits, delays, there's been a feeling of being sort of pent up or held back in some way, Mercury turning direct right now can sometimes have the effect of sort of helping you turn that corner, regain momentum, and start to recover from a period of challenges or difficulties. This may particularly come through in terms of like if there has been a period of breakdown in communication with someone that you're close to or a family member, you might start to see it coming back. Sometimes we'll also at this time backtrack or change our mind in some way about a decision we made during the retrograde period. You'll start to see that thing that you did during the retrograde period, whatever it might have been, that you made a choice on, you bought a ticket, you did this, you did that. And all of a sudden, as Mercury's turning direct, you'll change your mind somehow. You'll be a need to return something, or even sometimes something that's not been working or that's just been frustrating will suddenly start to work and you'll gain forward momentum again. It's important as Mercury is turning direct to reflect upon, what we've learned. What have the past weeks been teaching us? If you go back, Mercury's been retrograde for a little while, so let's go back and see how long. So Mercury turns retrograde around July 7th or 8th. So you have most of the month of July, Mercury's been retrograde. Now, again, right now, Mercury stationing, turning direct. So that backward movement, which often represents reversals, delays, changes of circumstance that set you back somehow, or turns of fate, reversals of fortune, it's turning around again. And so another twist in the plot coming. And sometimes really the best way of thinking about it is a turn for the better, a turn towards improvement. It may be gradual, it may be a little bit slow. The other thing to remember during this period is that the turn that's happening right now, look at this, right? It's in a pretty close opposition to Pluto. So there is some power, conversations that need to be had, a little bit deeper kind of death and rebirth signature around this reversal that's happening. That's just over the next few days. Add that to the kind of, big, new moon, Venus, stellium squaring Uranus. And there might be some very powerful kind of emotional breakthroughs or, important news or, some kind of shocking, disruptive element to relationships that comes through in the first couple of days. Things will start to smooth out as the process goes on, as the planets start releasing from the square to Uranus, as Mercury picks up steam and gets into Leo. You're going to see things stabilize again, especially Mercury getting out of a water sign and into a fixed fire sign. You'll start to feel like you're back in the driver's seat a little bit, especially if you're feeling more emotionally reactive the first couple days of the month. So that takes us up to about August. That's just today and tomorrow, right? Then we get to August 6th to August 8th. What I really like about this little window of time is that both Venus and the Sun are going through trines to Jupiter. Now, Venus is pretty badly debilitated at this time in terms she's combust. She's sort of really weakening. As she's moving through a trine to Jupiter, in Sagittarius. And what's interesting is Jupiter in Sagittarius this month, just a little bit later in the month, is about to turn direct. This gives us the feeling of a pretty auspicious little window of time between the 6th and the 8th and all the way through like the 11th, when it's right around that time that Jupiter turns direct. So what you're seeing here with Jupiter and the Sun hitting hitting Jupiter is, remember that both the Sun and Jupiter are the triplicity rulers of the fire signs, which means that by day or by night, these planets tend to represent the most beneficial kinds of connections that one could find when planets are traveling through the fire signs. If you have a connection to a planet in the Sun during the daytime in a fire sign and the Jupiter in the nighttime in a fire sign, aid other planets. They tend to assist other planets if the planet has a positive connection to Jupiter or the Sun when they're in fire signs. So all of that being said, this would mean that between the 6th and the 8th, it's very likely that positive, beneficial allegiances or friendships, allies, help, positive developments will occur. Now, with Venus debilitated, my feeling is this, that something in a relationship, something involving beauty, aesthetics, the look of something can be salvaged, even though initially it might look sort of messed up. Let's say someone does a painting job and they get the wrong color, right? And you're like, oh my God, you were supposed to paint my landlord told me they were going to repaint this apartment white because the previous tenant had it pink or something like that. And you move in and it's still pink. This would be the kind of situation where the landlord might be able to really quickly show up and, paint those walls or something like that. It's like, okay, quick fix. We'll just take care of it. That's a kind of a Venus example. But my point is that even if you were to think about relationships too, that where, there might be egos at play in relationships, some kind of compromise probably going to come out of it, even if Venus in Leo is a little tender right now around its sense of self-worth or its ego. It's very easy for us to feel slighted right now with Venus combust in Leo, for our relationships to work off from envy, pride, jealousy, puffed up peacock feathers stuff. So be careful of that, but this little window should be very auspicious in terms of finding beneficial connections with others, especially people who are in knowledge or people who are authoritative, people who have some kind of power to say yes to something. So that's there. Now, what I like that's really kind of nice here is we go around to the 11th, and I'm not doing every single transit of the month. I tend to pick the ones that I like the best. You get around to August 11th, and it's just this really sweet another nice little window this month that's happening. We've got two planets changing direction simultaneously. Uranus is going to go retrograde as Jupiter is going direct. So it's very interesting that you've got those two planets on the same day changing directions, and it's happening right as Venus starts moving into her Cazimi with the Sun. She goes into the heart of the Sun. She's reborn. She's rejuvenated. She gets a big boost of confidence, a sense of being important again, a sense of being in the game again if she's feeling a little wounded, or just greatly an inspired sense of confidence. And, I know where I'm going now. Some sense of having a mission or a purpose. And this is coincident with Jupiter turning direct, which tends to mean that, faith, confidence, forward movement, and momentum is sort of returning on some level. So this should also be a nice window. Frankly, after some of the drama of the past few months, and maybe I'm just being optimistic, but I'm like, August is looking pretty decent. Maybe the beginning's a little rocky, but all these trines to Jupiter that hit, and then the nice long Venus Cazimi that happens right around the middle of the month, I'm just really liking it. You can see here over the 12th, 13th, 14th, see how the Venus is right with the Sun moving through Cazimi that whole time and still bearing the mark of the separating within about 8 degrees, the separating trine, the emanation from Jupiter. Something really like, now we're talking. Now we're starting to turn some kind of corner. It seems to me like that's what's happening. Now, you can't deny that in the background, you've got like, okay, there's Saturn just kind of plugging away with the south node. Like, we're just moving through, just through blocks and through difficulties and like that. And we've got more of that to come. We know eclipses are coming around again. We know Saturn's got to turn station and turn direct again, and then head back for Pluto. So we got a couple of more good rounds in the ring with Saturn and Pluto, you know what I mean? Especially around the winter. But there is a corner that's being turned here, some initial stage of work that maybe we've been doing on an inner level or in our relationships or at work does seem to be turning a corner or gaining some positive momentum. All of this is relative, right? I mean, there's going to be scenarios where everything that I'm talking about clearly pertains to people who are going to experience just horrendous stuff, right? But the idea is not so much whether it's subjectively positive or subjectively negative. During this period of time, the most likely thing that I would say occurs is there is going to be some progress and some development that's quite expansive and probably beneficial, even if it's still playing along with the South Node Saturn theme of kind of having to slog through a heavier, more confrontational karmic season of our lives, kind of everywhere, right? So at any rate, just so that I don't sound like a total positivist here, but look, the Cazimi lasts, all the way through the 14th into the 15th. That's when you really see it start to separate. So all the way from the 11th to like the 15th, just like, wow, it's really bright. So I would not be impressed. I would not be surprised, if at that time, if we didn't see a real surge in one of the feminine or female candidates, for office. For example, I guess Kamala Harris, or what's the other one? Elizabeth Warren, right? Those are the female challengers. Or even Pete Buttigieg, who is homosexual and running for office, right? The Venus, the theme of women or something surrounding sexual identity, Venus sun, to become really empowered and sort of bright, that could stand out during this time as well. Now, I don't mean to bring politics into things. As far as I'm concerned, it's oftentimes does nothing but create a lot of drama. But nonetheless, you could also see any kind of feminine leadership or feminine authority or feminine power or fame in the world just sort of stepping up, something Venusian, really kind of, and very almost like kind of queenly coming forth during that time. So I like that one too. Now, and maybe that's because I have Venus and Leo natally, and it's that the Cazimi is going to be sort of right on my natal Venus. So I'm like, ooh, that, like that should be fun. I am going, interestingly enough, during that period of time where Venus is Cazimi, I'm going to be meeting with some people that I plan to hopefully work with. And so, I'm just like looking at that going, oh, that seems like maybe auspicious. So for you too, if you're going to meet with people, friendships, social circles, colleagues, it may be really beneficial. You may see positive, again, connections or relationships. Venus brings harmony, right? So harmonizing things in a positive way that's, pretty empowered. Now it's going to take a while to implement. Venus is in a fixed sign, and Venus has to move through a conjunction with Mars, which is coming later in the month. But let me go forward to the 18th. On the 18th, Mars is, I think this is a significant transit for the month. Mars is going to enter Virgo. And right as Mars enters Virgo, you're going to have, Venus is coming right about that time. Venus is going to come to really close to dropping into Virgo as well and conjoining Mars. So that's coming right on the heels of this. The reason that that's significant is because Venus is suddenly going to lose power. Venus is going to lose power, and because she's going into her fall in Virgo, and then she's conjoining Mars in Virgo. So the little bit later in the month, I'm a little bit worried about Venusian things due to having to conjoin with Mars in a sign where Venus is disempowered. So what does that look like? Here you can see it coming along right about there. So it's around the 23rd, the 24th, where they move through the conjunction, and the sun has moved into Virgo around that time as well. Now, this is a Mars that's starting to be co-opted by the sun. The sun's starting to squelch and burn up Mars at this time. So when that happens, my observation has been that Mars becomes more volatile. Mars becomes a little bit more testy. In Virgo, that would typically mean that criticism, perfectionism, that just things are just a little bit more sharp, cutting, critical. And so Venus may fall under that sort of burning, hot, dry, critical, cutting energy, which would typically deliver like a higher degree of like, a potential to be a lot meaner to oneself, or to be like more critical of one's body or of others, or to be a perfectionist. So I think right around August 23rd, 24th, that may peak a little bit. But there's also, because of the union between Mars and Venus, there's a kind of sexual tension in the air around it. I don't know if you this is going to sound, just outlandish or not, but sometimes we're attracted, both physically, emotionally, sexually, whatever. We are attracted to people who literally think very little of us, right? We're turned on by people who, want to point out our weaknesses or our flaws. Like, well, if I can impress them, then I'm worth something. So sometimes we become drawn to that which wants to criticize or be judgmental of us. I would be very careful of that sort of like, I'm attracted to that which wants to harm me, or that which acts superior to me, or that which, another one would be like, I'm just thinking of this image in my head, right? You're at the gym and there's a personal trainer, and the personal trainer's kind of whipping you into shape, and you're like, yeah, I just like it when you're mean to me. Do you know what I mean? So I'd be careful of that around August, 23rd into the 24th. I think that dynamic is a little troubling around that time. Now, let's say another thing that might go along with that would be for some level of beauty and sharpness and analysis to go together. For example, the discovery of a beautiful mathematical formula. It's very Venus, Mars in Virgo. The other thing that could come about would be the cutting of something into a beautiful shape. Cutting, Mars, beauty, Venus. The sexual tension and union could be quite intense around that time. You could also see just a deeper level of understanding being reached by being able to give and receive fair and open-minded criticism that's not meant to hurt, but that's meant to help. That would be the ideal there. So those are all things to keep in mind for this, that transit in particular. Here's something that you may or may not know. I did this last year to those of you who've been hanging around me for a while. I sent out wristbands to anyone who wanted one. I had, I don't know, about 1,000 of them made. And on the wristbands, it says, let's see if I can get it to see it. Kind words. Actually, I'll turn off my screen share for a second so you can see it better now. So it says kind words and clean heart. And then I have the Hare Krishna. Oh, it's my Hare Krishna mantra on the other side. So I started wearing this wristband after a challenge from a traveling sannyasi, it's like a monk in the Bhakti tradition that I had the chance to sit with and hear him speak. And one of the things that he talked about was the propensity that we have to criticize others and the way that it really poisons our mind. Not only the propensity that we have to criticize, but the propensity that we have to put our minds and our ears in the stream of criticism, right? So a stream of criticism could be let's say the potential to, or the tendency to listen to a lot of gossip, or the tendency to watch talk shows where people criticize and analyze one another a lot, right? Putting ourselves in that environment over time builds up toxicity. And so the environment of criticism is just as important as the actual speaking of criticism. And even if you're in a job where you have to analyze and judge things a lot, that builds up. And the point of another spiritual teacher of mine, a different one, says he's walking in San Francisco and he sees a drain in the street, and the drain says, "No dumping drains to the bay." don't dump stuff down there because this is draining right into the bay. Well, similarly, what we put into our ears, my spiritual teacher would say, drains into our heart. So I think with Venus moving into Virgo and conjoining with Mars as the sun is sort of, firing up Mars, is we have to be really careful about the words that we speak and the kind of mental environment that we're in, because it certainly can pollute the heart. Kind words, clean heart. The challenge of wearing this wristband was that basically every time that I criticized someone or judged something, right, verbally, not mentally, just verbally. Mentally would be way too hard. But verbally, I would take the wristband and switch it to the other arm. And then after I did that, I would start over. And the point was to try to get through 21 full days of not criticizing. And every time, if you're 7 days in and you're like, you just lash out with some criticism of something, you would switch it to the other arm. Now, there's a difference between criticism and, some kind of thoughtful, critical thinking, right? There's a big difference between, and you kind of have to be discerning about that. If you do an exercise like this, you can use a rubber band and do it. But if you wanted something to help you navigate the latter part of August, I would suggest even a 3-day criticism challenge, where you just try to make it through 3 days of not making any criticisms or judgments that are coming from that place of, just kind of trying to twist it in somewhere. I was surprised to find out how much of that existed in me. Now, I continue to wear this, not because I've mastered it, but because I still need it, just as a reminder, and it helps me. So that's part of me, by the way, I do analytical things for a living, right? Astrology is artistic, but it's also about analyzing things. And, in analyzing things, there's a way that we have of making ourselves, we're not receptive, we're not listening, and we're also, ironically, we're not very discerning about the environment that we put our mind in when we're constantly criticizing. We become dulled to the fact that criticism is the norm. So we lack a certain kind of discernment in that way. So that was a little spiritual message I just wanted to put in there for this month. Let me return and show you the screen again. We can finish up with a few things. So towards the very end of the month, we have, you're going to have right around the 29th, Mercury is going to pop into Virgo, and then look at what happens on the 30th. A new moon in Virgo. So that's a huge stellium of planets moving through Virgo towards the very end of August, right? And they are simultaneously engaging with a loose T-square to Neptune and to Jupiter. So that T-square energy between Jupiter and Neptune and then Virgo, it's really going to have to do with the vision versus the details. Where are we heading? Jupiter, Neptune. What is our hope? What is our dream? Where is our faith? And then how do we actually practice that? How do we implement it in practical ways? Are we being too hard on ourselves? Do we need a little bit more grace? For example, in spiritual life, one of the things that Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that's detrimental to us is to try to renounce or give something up before we're actually ready to do it. So you don't cultivate love of God or love of divinity. You don't cultivate love of one another by telling yourself, I ought to, I should, I must, I have to love God, or I have to love the universe, or I have to love other people. When we do that, it's a false appearance at best in the world and in ourselves that over time will breed all sorts of darkness. It breeds dishonesty. It breeds betrayal. It breeds resentment, right? It breeds jealousy. Because when we're living, pretending that we're one thing and actually being something else inside, then in living by oughts and shoulds, right? We know the difference. Our soul knows the difference. And so slowly we have to come to being authentic with ourselves about what we can and can't give, what we do and don't feel. And the point is that, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, spiritual life is not about renunciation. It's really about love. sometimes in order to have love be the focus of our lives, some elements of renunciation are necessary, some elements of practice, some elements of, and sometimes we have to learn through the law, through karma, through Saturn. And that teaches us. But what we're trying to get to is the natural desire to love. You don't kiss someone when you're on a date because I'm like, well, I should, and it ought to happen, right? No, it's because of a spontaneous, natural attraction. So similarly, some of the questions around this late August Virgo stellium with the square or the opposition to Neptune and the square to Jupiter are about how to make our faith and our values and our ideals natural, rather than trying to force them in ways that are overly, sort of dry or rigid or analytical, or, at the same time, we can't there's a lot of things that just don't come naturally. Like, nobody wants to talk about it. But one of the hardest things that people have about God, in my opinion, is not so much whether or not God exists, it's what to do about it. The part about what to do about it, I think for many people is deeply frustrating. For example, I remember growing up in the church and being like, I was a preacher's kid, right? Wow, God sounds really amazing. This all loving, sort of mysterious presence, this being that's like in everything. And, so you learn about this and you're like, yeah. And so what do I do? Like, well, so what happens next? And it's like, well, just believe. And you're like, yeah, but I like hot dogs, or you're like, it's like, I like to go swimming. Is that like, what do I do? So I think one of the things that it's really hard for us to figure out is how to actually enact, how to actually embody and inhabit a faith, how to inhabit some sense of connection, right? A lot of the ways in which we tend to inhabit faith are by expressing it outwardly to others as a form of idealism. I have faith because look at the way I dress, or look at the books that I recommend, or look at the shows that I'm watching, or I'm an evolved spiritual being because look at the meme I just posted, or look at the profound personal sharing I just offered, or something like that. But this Virgo energy with the opposition to Neptune and the square to Jupiter will also really focus on how to enact something in a way that is authentic, right? I remember when I was younger, right? And I would go out on dates and I wanted a relationship, right? I wanted a marriage, right? You wanted a family. I'm a Cancer sun, right? So of course, I was like, though I want those things. Those sound really nice. And then when I was out on dates, I would like try to play the role of like, yeah, well, a girl wants a guy who wants those things. So, I would try to sort of method act like, oh, I'd be a good husband, or I'd be, you know what I mean? And I look back now, and this is my 20-year-old self or whatever. And, I'm just like, yeah, you were trying, and of course, like the ones who were the girls I dated who were, intelligent and really sort of saw me, weren't lost in their own idealism, right? They would be like, I think you like the idea of me, and I think you like the idea of this stuff, but you're not really ready to inhabit that stuff yet. And I remember it would just feel so insulting and so hurtful, and it's kind of like, now I understand, right? Now I understand why. And so similarly with our relationship to divinity, with our relationship to spirit, it's very hard for us to figure out how to actually inhabit that relationship in an authentic way. We know we want it. We know it's good. We know it exists. We know it's what we somehow ought to be or even should be doing on some level, right? But really, we want it to be natural. And we don't know exactly what that looks like. And so the end of this month of August, to me, and heading into September, and the theme of September that we'll be talking about later, has to do with inhabiting your faith, inhabiting your ideal, making it real, embodying it, and the details of how that happens, and what represents an attempt to kind of make the form, like make it a formal thing versus making it more organic. And my feeling in terms of faith life is, you know, for those of you who are thinking, yeah, that really fits. Like I'm looking for ways to, you know, embody my own faith more. To me, one of the most important things is that more of our faith life, more of our inner life is taking place outside of the public forum, where mostly what we try to display of ourselves is formal. It's an act. For most of us, our real self and the ability to inhabit something authentic, it requires privacy, quiet, a degree of secrecy, and also a certain degree of you know, we have to process things. They take time. They're slower, and we also need some sense of intimacy. The intimacy can't emerge without those things. So that's my advice, is at the end of the month to also just, you know, as the month goes on, to think about the difference between sort of the public self and all of there's a lot more sort of public energy on the front end of the month. And then you get to that back end with that big T-square between the Virgo stellium, Neptune, and Jupiter. And it feels to me much more like I'm trying to inhabit the beliefs that I hold. And I might need to step away from looking at the superficial experiences or appearances and cutting them apart and analyzing them. And I may instead have to step into deeper intimacy. If you want deeper intimacy to exist with spirit, my experience of being a long-time meditator is that some kind of private time, some kind of quiet time, whether that's journaling or meditation or chanting, is very important. You know, waking early and being with the sun. What's that saying about, I heard someone say this recently about sunrise. If you wake before the sun, waking before the sunrise makes a person healthy, wealthy, and wise. And it's like it's like something your grandpa would say or something. But to me, as someone who has gotten up before the sun for a long time in my life, I think it's really beautiful, valuable information. So anyway, I'd love to hear how your months are going, how your month goes, and any stories that you might have to share now or as the month progresses. I will be taking a look at each of these transits as we go through the month, as I usually do. I'll sort of zero in on certain transits, and there'll be lots of layers that will come up for us in each of these transits that we're only scratching the surface of now. And stay tuned for my sun and rising sign horoscopes, which I will have out in the next few days. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.